This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Welcome to the Possibility Club podcast. Very good day to you. This series is about practical bravery. It's about rolling your sleeves up and figuring out how to change things for the better, even when the easiest thing might be just to quietly conform and not rock the boat. This episode is about defending motherhood. The UK ranks pretty well, surprisingly, on the global maternity rights spectrum. On paper, it seems that we support pregnant and postnatal women at work with government-funded pay, legal protections around job security, accrued holiday and salary increases even if not at work, and a good deal of flexibility and autonomy about how and for how long this is all in place. Well, thank goodness for trade unions and the European Union, eh? The UK would never diminish their roles, imagine. But what is the reality that we need to be honest about? How can businesses up their game and consider their impact when they're looking at maternity rights and policy, going beyond what's compliant to what's helpful and compassionate? Firstly, maternity rights legislation impacts different businesses in very different ways, particularly if size is involved. For even the most generous, values-led, people-first small business or charity, it is incredibly difficult to fully financially support a team member for up to a year when they're not working. The balance and legal requirements are probably about right, but it can often mean that employers can only do bare minimum and are not as generous as they would like to be. Corporations, on the other hand, much bigger organisations, well, they should have the resources to absorb this and to be generous. We know it's a mixed picture, but companies like Aviva and Unilever famously really do look after new parents in the workforce, and they have to be recognised for that. But fundamentally, what is the impact on women and on female employees? I'm focusing on mums rather than dads here, simply because it is where the vast majority of the impact is felt. And I say that as a father and an employer. We can debate whether or how this should change in different episodes. But according to the Independent newspaper and a study in May 2022, there's of course a lot more going on than just money and pay. Returning to work after having a baby can be terrifying for women. It can take around 5 months for new mums to resettle, feeling like a brand new employee even if they've been at the firm for years. And this can create havoc for identity and self-confidence. 40% of returners feel that they have to prove themselves, and a third said that the experience was often overwhelming and led to feelings of inadequacy. The 3 best things about returning to work, according to many women, and let's acknowledge that most companies do go out of their way to make this as easy as possible, is income, sure, but it's also going to the toilet without being hassled. That's a big deal when you are getting used to having a little one at home. And being around other people, colleagues, friends. And it's in that order of things of importance. So what can businesses do to recognise this, to read and to see and to hear what women are really asking for, and to be brave around maternity support and the impact that they create through their culture, empathy and leadership? It isn't just about money. New mums are worried about leaving children with other people, about juggling new responsibilities, childcare, and bringing their whole self to work. They're worried about being knackered. They're worried about the cost of childcare and about flexibility for emergencies and illness or anything else that might mean the child and mum need to be together. And sometimes hours and working patterns don't dictate when that should be or can be. And if your work is linked to your self-esteem and your purpose and your professional and personal identity and motivation, then time away from it and not thinking about that 24 hours a day can crash that confidence, especially given how much a business and its processes can change in 9 months or a year. And then the guilt. Why should any of this get in the way when having children is a privilege and a choice? Think many mums and think many people who haven't had children. It's a fair question, but it also kind of misses the point about wider society. So whether you're looking through the lens of productivity or performance, culture or compliance, then any business's HR strategy, whether there are 20 of you or 2,000 of you or 20,000, should be to be an organisation in which people can be their best. There can be great positive impact in seeing maternity support as an opportunity to rally round, upskill, demonstrate collective empathy, and recognising that there will be some new perspectives and priorities that could actually be helpful. Parents do bring something to the workforce. As an employer, you have an opportunity to genuinely transform someone's life for the better in ways that could almost certainly foster loyalty, close connection, and creative thinking. It is really hard for small businesses, but so is everything. Lean into it, collaborate with affected staff rather than just hide behind policies. How can the business help with childcare, which is the number one barrier and concern? It could be through tax relief and salary sacrifice, or just by being flexible on work start and end times. My guest this week was sacked by her employer over email 2 days after she informed them she was pregnant. To tackle this legally, when she had been also told that she was a high-risk pregnancy, it would have been costly and exhausting, and she had bills to pay. So, at the time, she didn't know which direction to turn to. But she did found an extraordinary organisation called Pregnant Then Screwed in 2015, a charity dedicated to ending the motherhood penalty, supporting tens of thousands of women each year and successfully campaigning for change. How successful? Well, in Jeremy Hunt's 2023 March budget, he declared that the government would extend free childcare to 30 hours a week for all preschool children over 9 months. Now maybe it doesn't go far enough, and for sure the financing for nurseries is complex, and this will have many nurseries looking at their budgets and wondering how the hell they're going to pay for all of this, or how the hell they're going to increase all the provision that's going to be needed. But let's put that aside for a second, because a win is a win, and this is a big deal. The government have not taken childcare seriously at all previously, and this win and this policy change is definitely in no small part to this week's Possibility Club guest. Motherhood defender, entrepreneur, charity leader, agent provocateur, and organiser of the March of the Mummies, and author of the brilliant The Motherhood Penalty, How to Stop Motherhood Being the Kiss of Death for Your Career. My very special guest this week is Jolie Brearley. Welcome to the Possibility Club podcast. How are you doing? Wish I could see all your faces, but I can't. So I have to imagine them, and you're all very beautiful. I'm Richard Freeman, and as always, I'm here joined with a brilliant guest, and we're going to explore all things change and impact and sort of added value in the world, and how people are rolling their sleeves up and doing extraordinary things, sometimes against the odds. And my guest here is absolutely a manifestation of that, doing some really quite groundbreaking stuff that I want to explore. Good morning. Hello, Jolie Brearley. How are you doing?
Hello, Richard. Yeah, I'm doing all right. I've had a little walk this morning and it's freezing cold outside, and I'm just settling in for a lovely conversation with you. Perfect.
That's perfect. The perfect thing to be doing. So people will know you from the Pregnant and Screwed organisation that you're running, the March for the Mummies campaigns, pushing maternity rights and changing and shaping a conversation about how we as a society should be thinking very differently about pregnancy, maternity, parental responsibilities, rights, leave, all that. Tell me a little bit about your journey up to that, kind of doing this. So what was your life before putting yourself out there and being at the vanguard of disruptive, brilliant, purposeful change?
Oh, okay. Well, before Pregnant and Screwed, life before Pregnant and Screwed, I can't imagine what that was. But I started life working in the arts, firstly in the music industry, and did a lot of events and event management, and thought really that's what I wanted to do. But after a number of years doing it, I thought, actually, I'm not sure this really is what I want to do. It's all consuming, and it can be quite a sexist world. The music industry is definitely a sexist world. But after the arts, I had a stint in London that lasted about 6 months. That was a complete disaster, but that's another story. And then I moved into the world of technology and started working for an organisation that supported the digital sector in the Northeast. Most of my life, I lived in Newcastle. Then after that, I decided to combine the two. So I set up an organisation called Culture Code. And the idea of that organisation was to help the arts be better with innovation and technology. And so I became an expert in hacking models, which is basically a process for creating innovation in very sort of stale organizations.
That's exciting.
And I did that for a few years until I got screwed, and then everything changed.
So here we are in early 2023. Your mission is getting a lot of coverage, and absolutely rightly so. Tell me, what is it you do? What's the headline? And then what do you really do? What are you trying to change? What's the more complex, messy, can't be summed up in 10 seconds?
The one-liner is we exist to end the motherhood penalty. And not a lot of people know what we mean by the motherhood penalty, but essentially we mean the gender pay gap. We talk about the gender pay gap, and often we don't even mention motherhood. But we know that the pay differential between men and women who don't have children is miniature, absolutely tiny. And it's as soon as you get into those childbearing years that pay gap starts to widen, and it widens further and further and further until by the time your first child is 12 years old, a woman's hourly pay rate is 33% behind a man's. And so we want to close that gap. That's what we want to do. And we do that through dealing with the symptoms of the problem, which are a free advice line for women experiencing discrimination in the workplace, helping women take their employer to tribunal and get the justice that they deserve, helping them deal with the mental health impact of experiencing discrimination, and doing events and activities that build confidence and help women deal with the current structures that are in place that aren't working for them. And then we also try and deal with the issue long term and change that system and that structure so that it works better for women who have children. And we do that through campaigning and lobbying and through using tools such as social media to try and change this narrative and help people understand what's really happening, to help mothers understand that it's not their fault. None of this is their fault. We've been around for 8 years in March. And with each year, we're growing, we're becoming stronger, we're becoming better at communicating, and we're building the networks and the relationships that we need to really start to get under the skin of this issue and to hopefully ultimately change things.
What's your diagnosis of the real cause of this? Beyond a broken, bullshit patriarchal society in which men are making all the decisions. I mean, that probably is the crux of it. But why is this so rubbish?
If you go back to the invention of capitalism, right? Before capitalism, women did have more autonomy. There was more equality. And through the creation of capitalism, you needed somebody to be creating the next labour force. You needed somebody who was procreating, reproducing the labour force, looking after that labour force, and doing the other bits of work that are required in order to sustain capitalism, the unpaid labour. And that was, of course, if you go back to the 1700s, although women did work, it was very much expected that all our role is, what we exist for is motherhood, is to reproduce that labour force to keep capitalism going. And, single mothers had no rights whatsoever. They were locked up in workhouses.
Mm-hmm.
Black women had no rights whatsoever. Their children were taken off them and taken into the slave trade while they breastfed and nursed white women's children. So obviously things are a bit better than that now. We have come some way.
Progress is always hard to measure, but actually there's some of the attitudes are still probably from the 1700s, aren't they? There's
so many centuries of those attitudes that it's going to take a while. If you look at the 1950s, and I was reading to my child the other day, The Tiger That Came to Tea.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read The Tiger That Came to Tea?
Many times, yeah.
It was written in the 1950s, where mummy stays at home with her daughter. They bake cakes and look after the shopping and the food that's in the house and do the cleaning. And then daddy comes home and daddy has his beer. Where's his beer? Where's daddy's beer? Mm-hmm. And then he expects his food on the table. And of course it's not there. And then daddy saves the day and takes him out to a cafe. I sort of think really when we drill down, we're not too far away from that in terms of attitude and the way that our structures and systems have changed, yes, but not enough for us to not expect our workforce to be unencumbered workers. We expect them to be able to work at the drop of a hat, to work long hours, to not have other things on their minds. And of course, that just isn't the reality, because we now have an economy where we expect both there to be a dual income household. It requests that of us. You cannot, most people will live in poverty if they have a one income household. Yeah. The reason why the change is so slow is partly because the whole structure outside of that is patriarchal. Really, we need to burn the whole thing down. Everything needs to be burnt down and started again, because you have politicians, the majority of politicians that are making decisions about what legislation to push through are men, and men that have either stay-at-home partners or they have nannies that are looking after their children. They don't have to think about this. This isn't in their face every single day. And the women that are there are too scared to have these conversations because they're working within a patriarchal structure. And if they do what Stella Creasy did and do something as radical as take your baby into Parliament, suddenly that's it. You're branded as, that's your thing. Oh, you're the person that just talks about motherhood and children. You don't have anything else interesting to say. And so many of the women are too scared to push these issues. And then if you look at companies, still, the heads of the majorities of companies that are making these decisions are men, and they're older men who come from a time where it was expected that women stay at home with the kids and that they go out and earn the money. And so society is slowly changing. Our attitudes are very slowly changing, but the structures are forcing us back into these positions that we don't want to be in.
And Stella's been a guest on this podcast in the past. We had a really interesting chat about a lot of that campaigning. But her point was, it's got to happen in communities. It's got to happen in, the whatever happens in Parliament is such a fraction of actually where real power lies. And I have to, constantly checking my own assumptions on the structures that I'm perpetuating. As a business owner, where 80% of my colleagues are women. I employ mostly women. I'm a father. I'm a husband, raised by a single parent feminist. My understanding of the structural failures I always think are quite acute, and I check whether I'm a part of it. However, I'm always making assumptions. I'm always assuming my wife's going to do something, or that I can do something. Because I don't have to think about, as you say, what implications that might have. I'm always being, why have you booked meetings at pickup time? You're just assuming I'm going to do it. That something as tiny as that, from my wife, is just a completely reasonable point to make. But I will constantly forget to block in my diary that maybe I need to be available to pickup time. Things like that, and it's frightening, isn't it? We're not having big enough conversation about it. Well, you are. You're steering that conversation, but what else can we do?
I'm guilty of it. I say things that are sexist. And I think many women, because we are told that we are the ones that are meant to be picking the kids up from school, we know that we have the pressure on us for the house to look good. If somebody comes round and your house is a complete shit tip, then we know that we're the ones that are going to be judged for it, not our partner. And so we do, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy because we just, do it and don't question it. It's the same with race and racism, isn't it? Really trying to unpick your own racism is really challenging. So as a white woman, I can see how difficult it can be for men when they're thinking about the things that are ingrained in them. My partner would consider himself very progressive, but I pull him up on stuff all the time. And sometimes you can see he's quite disgruntled that I've said, and then he'll think about it and you can see it sort of sinks in, and he realizes that actually perhaps that was sexist. And so, if he lives with me, has to deal with me all the time. And if he's still saying or making assumptions like he does, you think about the people that don't have this influence in their lives, and they're not questioned on it. I mean, we saw yesterday when Jacinda Ardern resigned, a headline. Did you see the headline in the BBC?
I did. Can women really have it all?
Yeah.
On the BBC.
Absolute madness. That's deeply concerning from the BBC. The fact that you've got a woman that absolutely did have it all. I mean, she was Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's very candid about that. The only way she managed to do all of that is because she had a stay-at-home husband who was doing the unpaid labour and doing the childcare. And that's what many successful men have. They have a stay-at-home wife who takes care of all of the shit that you don't see, so that they can go out and be brilliant heroes. The question isn't, can women have it all? The question is, when are men going to do more of the unpaid labour?
All of what our structures, our stories, as you say, in the Tiger that came to the tea, but it's still in media and television and films now. We don't see that as an equal partnership. There'll always be kind of one hero and one supporter.
You've got the two things feeding each other, in that you've got these deeply entrenched biases that we've all grown up with, seeing on the media, the women doing the ironing and the cooking and the cleaning, seeing that everywhere in our lives, and the men going out to work and being the breadwinners. So it's all deeply entrenched in us. But then also you have these structures that are preventing the men that want to understand this issue and want to do more and be more active from actually doing that. So parental leave in the UK still enormously favours women taking the time out, women taking 9 months to a year out of work, and men taking 2 weeks and then going back to work because of the way it's set up. And yes, we do have shared parental leave, but it's a nonsense. It doesn't work. Only 2% of eligible families use it. But what that tends to mean is that the woman takes that step back from her career. She becomes very firmly in that position of primary carer, because babies don't come with a manual. They turn up and you've got to figure out, how to look after them, how they like feeding, how they like sleeping, how it's complicated and exhausting work. And you learn that on the job, so that when you return to work, you are still in that position of primary carer. You're still the one that the baby will be handed to, that can comfort the baby better, that understands how to get them to sleep or whatever it is. So you're in that trap then. That's it. Like the structure's there. And it means that it's women that are making these choices about stepping back from work, going part-time, looking at childcare costs. They're way too expensive. Okay, well, we can't afford that, so I'm the one that will sacrifice my career. None of this is about blaming men. If we fix those structures and systems so they worked a bit better, we would have more equality.
This podcast is brought to you by Always Possible. But who are we?
Always Possible works with ambitious businesses, charities, and public services that are thinking about what's next.
From architects to aerospace companies, puppet theatres to primary schools, business networks to big data analysts.
If you're wanting to be brave with some big decisions, or to be clearer about what to prioritise, then an award-winning workshop from the Always Possible team is a brilliant starting point.
We care about just one thing: building ideas that work.
For creative, intuitive, and practical expertise, consider Always Possible as your strategic partner. Find out more about how we could power up your mission. Visit alwayspossible.co.uk.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
So you say you've been going for 8 years. Probably fair to say in the last couple of years, the visibility has risen and from an outsider looking in, the impact has been greater. How do you measure that? How do you know if it's working? When you as a team sit back and look at your, whether it's you're writing your annual report or you're just having a conversation about what to do next, what metrics do you use to say, yeah, this is working?
I mean, measuring impact is hard, right? It's really difficult. And because we have two sides of the organisation, we have the support services side and we have the more sort of nebulous campaigning, writing, trying to change the culture of the UK. The support services side is pretty straightforward. You can measure that. How many calls are we getting? We send them an evaluation form afterwards. Our metrics that we look at are confidence, improved knowledge, and well-being. So we can easily track that. How did you feel more confident after this call? Did you feel like you knew a bit more about what you could do next? Did you feel like your well-being had improved? And we can see from the metrics that we do really, really well on that. People are really happy after they engage with us and work with us. And we help women take their employer to tribunal. So we look at outcomes in terms of finances. So we know last year that we helped women secure £1.3 million in terms of settlements after experiencing discrimination or in a tribunal case. What gets trickier is when you're particularly talking about campaigning, because the campaigns that we run are not little tweaks. They're not easy things to fix. This is about radically changing the way that we live and work. And so we never expected to start this campaign and 2 years later the government go, oh, right, okay, yeah, don't worry, we'll fix all that. We knew that we had to be in this for the long haul. The only way we can really measure our success is based on how often are the press talking about these issues, and is that improving and increasing each year? How often are they having these conversations in Parliament? So we monitor both of those things. How many sort of inquiries are there that are related to our campaign? How many Westminster debates are there related to our campaign? But there is a lot that happens that is really almost impossible to measure. And we know that even just using social media and talking about these issues online is changing the way people view these issues. But how on earth do you measure that? How do you? I have no idea. And we get messages all the time from people saying, I've been following you for 4 years or whatever, and then this thing happened to me at work, and there's absolutely no way I would have had the confidence to challenge it had I not been following what you're doing. And I did challenge it, and I've kept challenging it, and now the whole of my workplace is changing, and they've put in these new policies, and they're putting fantastic, lovely, brilliant messages that are enormously exciting. But you can't measure that. I can take a photo of it and keep it in a file, but I can't tell you any metrics off the back of it.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think that codifying some of that more intangible, anecdotal, is the thing that most people say, we know we're doing massive there, but we can't measure it. It's finding ways to almost turn that into a form of metric. But that happens at an organizational level. There's no national, there's no agreed way of doing that. And that's something I'm really kind of fascinated in. I think some organizations are beginning to do that well, moving from just case studies, but actually into sort of how many times is that happening? Putting a measure or range about what kind of scale that impact is happening. If they're changing a whole organization. What you said there's two sides to your charity. And I hear this a lot. There's the services side, to almost the reactive, responsive. There's a failure or a deficit at state level, and so you're there to kind of pick up the pieces and to support and help people who are in that situation because something's not working. And then you've got the campaigning side, the lobbying side, the change side. Almost, it's a kind of self-defeating cycle, isn't it? Because if the campaigning side really does have all the impact that you'd like, then the service side would not need to exist. What is it you want to be famous for? When you retire, or when the business is 100 years old, or the charity's been going, what is it? What's the one thing that you think you'd love people to be really saying, that's why this existed? Is it the quality of the service and supporting those people, or is it the change that's being made, overall?
So I get my kicks from the services, because we get messages all the time saying, you changed my life. Without you, I would have fallen apart. And having experienced pregnancy discrimination myself, where I was kicked out of my job at 4 months pregnant because I was pregnant, and then my life collapsing and, being in a total hellhole for a really long period of time as a result of that, then I know the value of having these services and having people that you can talk to that get it and that are there to help you. I do get my kicks out of the campaigning, of course, as well, but campaigning is losing. Campaigning is bashing your head against a brick wall. And so if we didn't have the support services, I think I probably would have burnt out by now, because I would just have been constantly thinking, come on, nothing's happening. It's been 7 years. I can't keep going at this. And you get knockbacks all the time. But ultimately, my ambition, I've got probably a smaller ambition than a bigger ambition. And by the time I've finished, my smaller ambition is that I want the childcare sector, the childcare system to be fixed. Mm-hmm. That to me is at the heart. It really is the heart of inequality. Firstly, because you've got this workforce who are women, usually young women, usually Black, brown women, who are paid appallingly badly, like disgustingly badly, for doing this job that is so valuable to the future of our society. It's educating kids. It's not babysitting. They're not just sitting watching the telly while they're asleep. They're educating and caring for the most precious little beings in our society, our future generation.
At their most formative point.
These are the architects of our children's brains, and we're paying them so badly that 1 in 10 are using food banks. That to me is just disgraceful. Mm-hmm. I'm so angry about it when I think about it. So there's the worker side, and then of course there's the fact that because we have a childcare system that is so inaccessible, so unaffordable, so completely dysfunctional, it is locking women back in the home. And we've been fighting for this since, the 50s. Women have been out on the streets demanding that there is better childcare facilities, because we no longer want to be tied to the kitchen sink. We have dreams, we have skills, we want to be going out and doing things for ourselves as well as doing things for our children. And without a properly functioning childcare system, we simply can't. So if we fix that system, it will do so much for women and for women's equality, as well as doing so much for kids if we get it right. I will not give up on this until that's in place. That's the thing I want to change. But larger than that, by the time I die, I would love to live in a society where when a couple have a baby, it's not expected that one of them will be the ones that do the care work and the unpaid labour, that conversation will genuinely be egalitarian and equal.
And how receptive is the childcare sector? How receptive are they to the work that you're doing, and how collaborative it is at? And do you see the dial shifting at all on that?
It's a good question. And the answer is yes and no. So we work really closely with organisations like the Early Years Alliance, and they fully get what we do, and we're fully aligned, and we work together really, really well, because we talk about the parents, the impact on the parents. They talk about the disaster that is this sector and how it's collapsing with real authority. And of course, things have got a lot worse over the last 3 years. They've really have deteriorated because you had COVID, and then we've had the cost of living crisis. And as we know, the money that the government gives to the childcare sector they underfund those places by about £3 per child per hour and don't give those nurseries opportunities to make up that shortfall. So those costs have to be passed down the chain. So the costs are increasing for parents. And it means that's why you have childcare professionals on minimum wage, because you can't afford to pay them anymore. And we're seeing the collapse of the childcare sector. We've had 20,000 nurseries close since 2015. We've had 4,000 close in the last year. It's like a domino effect there. One by one, they're collapsing because they can't afford to continue to operate. Of course, when we talk about it, because we're an organisation that works with mothers, we talk about it from the perspective of the mothers. And some providers don't like that. They think that we should be talking about it in a very different way. And some providers think that we're just whinging and moaning, and that actually, then they say things like, well, of course, they're your precious children. You should be paying a lot more than you are doing for them to be cared for and educated during the day. And you think, come on, guys, we're in this together. We did a campaign once where women were holding up boards that said on them how much they'd spent on childcare over their lifetime, how much they'd actually spent. And, people were holding up boards that said like 150 grand because they'd had like 3 children that had gone through childcare. And, those are realistic, those are the costs. The providers didn't like it because it made it look like, they were...
The message was childcare costs too much rather than it should be better funded.
Yeah, but we always make that point, and our campaigning is always about the fact that childcare provision is so badly funded by the government in comparison to other countries. As a proportion of GDP, we pay very little because the government don't care about it. They see it as babysitting. They don't see it as early years education. But the fact of the matter is that this argument will be won off the back of parents. It will not be won off the back of providers, because we're a bigger group. We're making that noise. We're making that point repeatedly. There's no point in us falling out with the providers all the time. The providers and us need to be working together to make sure that the message comes across of what exactly is needed. And we know that the parents will not accept low quality provision. So when the government put forward this idea of increasing ratios so that more children could be looked after by childcare professionals, thereby reducing the cost, parents went nuts and said, absolutely no way. There is no way that I am going to risk the education and the safety of my child for lower fees. I'm just not going to do it. So we are all on the same page. It's just that sometimes people don't see it that way.
You're clearly a good communicator, and you're clearly able to get the message that you want to get across. What channels do you find the best ways to communicate? First, what your key messages are, but also about yourself as an organisation, and is it a quick press release? Is it finding good allies within the media that amplify it? Is it through self-generated content, podcast, blogs, social media? Is it through other more strategic partnerships? I'm fascinated how you hone that so that people really hear what you want them to hear.
I don't come from a charity background. And so when I started this organisation, I didn't come with preconceived ideas about how we communicate. And I started this organisation because I was furious. I was so angry. And I had my own experiences of what we're campaigning on. And so that meant that when I talked about it from the heart and in a way that worked for me. And we've never lost that. We've kept that tone. You asked me earlier, what do I really do? I spend a lot of my time on social media, and you're not going to get many CEOs that say that, particularly of charities. CEOs do not spend time on social media. Well, I think that some people would laugh at me if would think that's hilarious. Oh, silly Wally, spending time on social media. You should be strategizing. But to me, there are 2 reasons why it's imperative that we really invest in social media. Partly because if we're a charity and we are supposedly representing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of women, how can we do that if we're not having conversations with them? Like that is not okay. You've got to be in regular dialogue with the people that you're representing so that you understand them, so that you get them, so that you make sure that what you're saying is right and works for them. And you can only do that, I think, through tools like social media. But also, we are campaigners, and there is absolutely no point in running a campaign if you're just shouting into the wilderness. You've got to show that people want this change as much as you do. Politicians respond to stuff that's going to win them votes, and so if you can demonstrate that you've got many people that feel really strongly about this, then they're more likely to take it seriously. But also we, of course, because we've got such a big following now, so many people that support us, it means that we can do things like collect surveys, get data, get them to write to their MP. It gives us real strength and means that more people will listen to us. And the way that we do that is we're not boring. Charities are boring. God, some of the stuff they put out, I think, nobody's going to read that, mate. Nobody cares. You just put some stats there and some waffle that is completely meaningless. And the way that we tone things is we try and use humour. And
well, your name, the organisation's name is the first thing anyone hears or sees about the organisation. Is it's a sort of cheeky, provocative, funny, serious, sort of slap in the face that makes you go, what? Which is great. That's an effect from the first second.
It was going to be worse than that to begin with, but I decided to tone it down a little.
You do want the papers to talk about you, therefore you have to modify it a little.
I did realise that wasn't going to work. I mean, it's hilarious, the number of people that comment on our name, people that have messaged me and said, I would love to support what you're doing, but I can't because of what you're called. And I think, oh, okay, well. If people see us as friends, they don't see us as a faceless institution. That's the difference, I think. And that's why people trust us. And that's why people will do what we ask them to do. We asked them last week to send an email to their MP about the EU retained law bill, and 68,000 people emailed their MP. I've talked to massive organisations about us doing that. And they're like, what? How have you done that? Mm-hmm. And it's because they trust us. They believe that we will do what we say. They feel like they're our mate, and they know that we've got their best interest at heart.
Do they come to you and say, can you solve my problem, rather than can your organisation help me? Yeah. How do you care for yourself? How do you protect yourself in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say there. People do have very high expectations of me and see, they think they know me. And then if people are constantly asking me to speak at things, people are constantly asking me to do certain things.
You on their podcasts. And horrible people. Who would do that?
How very dare they? And as well as messages. And if they don't get a response, or if I say no, they feel far more let down than if it's somebody that they didn't feel that they knew previously. Mm-hmm. But also we've grown, of course. We've been around for 8 years. And so we now have the support services, which are really well staffed, and, brilliant women will answer calls. So I'm in a slightly better position than I was when I started, in that I can go, look, we've got this amazing team that will help you. We can support you. But all of the staff that work at Pregnant and Screwed get therapy now, free therapy, because some of the stories we get is really traumatic. And during the pandemic, that went from I am being bullied and harassed at work, or I've been pushed out of my job and I don't know what to do, to if I go to work tomorrow, I could die because I'm pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so the early stages of the pandemic, there were just 2 members of staff at this point at Pregnant and Screwed, and a much smaller volunteer team, tiny compared to what it is now. We were dealing with pregnant women had no safety mechanisms in place. And of course, were terrified because we know that respiratory diseases, pregnant women don't fare well with respiratory diseases. And there was no guidance for them. The government didn't publish guidance for pregnant women until 9 months after the pandemic started.
And so vaccines, it wasn't clear whether they were safe or not for a long time as well. So, yeah.
We didn't have the vaccine, none of that. And so we were, I wasn't sleeping. I was barely eating. I spent 4 months doing everything I could to try and keep pregnant women safe, because it became about life or death. And then, in April, Mary Agyapong, the first pregnant woman, died. She was a 28-year-old nurse who'd spent her life caring for others. And when it came to the crunch, no one cared for her. And she died. And her daughter, who's now called Mary, survived. And that broke me. I mean, crushed me to the point where I ended up being diagnosed a year and a half later with vicarious trauma, because I'd taken that on as my fault. Without saying it out loud until I had therapy, I thought that was my fault. I thought I hadn't done enough to stop her from dying. And then one after another, pregnant women were dying because they weren't being looked after. And so that pressure is utterly, overwhelming. But then on top of that, using social media, you also become a target for hate from men who hate women. But also, we've done a lot talking about the vaccine. I've had death threats. I've had so much abuse on social media that I've been scared to leave the house. I've been, very nervous when I have, thinking, that man's looking at me, checking they've not got knives in their pocket. It's got serious. It's got really dark, really serious. And so, yes, there are enormous risks with using social media and with you being yourself, and not a faceless institution. It's hard. It's tough. And you're constantly worried you're going to get cancelled at any moment for something you say.
Well, all power to you for navigating your way through that. I don't think I could have done that. I don't think many others can have done that. So there's something you've got there that is a bit of a superpower. So thank goodness you do. What are you looking forward to in 2023?
We have a general election happening in 2024. So this is an opportunity that we only get every 5 years. And so right now, political parties are writing their manifestos. And so this is our year, really, for, look at all the previous years that we've been working on these campaigns. We need to be so thunderously loud this year that our messages are ringing through parliamentary corridors and people cannot avoid them wherever they look and wherever they turn. And so we've got lots of plans to make sure that childcare, parental leave, flexible working, and pregnancy and maternity discrimination remain firmly in the press and firmly in Westminster. Part of that is going to be about framing and language and thinking about how we can turn the people who say to me, why should my taxes pay for your lifestyle choice when I talk about childcare? The Jeffs of the world, I must get about 10 messages a day that say that. How do we change the Jeffs to them realizing that investing in childcare is good for them and good for all of us? That's what we will have solved by the end of this year.
I don't doubt it, Jolie. I don't doubt it. Well, all the luck in the world. I imagine, I hope, I expect every one of our listeners 100% behind you on that. It's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you very much for being on the Possibility Club.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Thank you for listening to the Possibility Club, Practical Bravery. If you enjoyed this episode, do like, share, review, tell everybody about it. Look in the show notes for all the details of today's guest, stuff we talked about, stuff that's of interest, new things to read, new things to listen to. And if you are running a business or a charity and you are trying to accelerate or improve the impact that you have in the world, if you want to be famous for what you do and what you change rather than just what you sell, then talk to us. alwayspossible.co.uk. We want to hear from you, we want to talk to you, we want to amplify and elevate your ideas, and who knows, we might be able to help you feel more confident and clear about what's next. alwayspossible.co.uk. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new special guest and a new insight on practical bravery in action.
The Possibility Club is an Always Possible podcast. The interviewer was Richard Freeman for Always Possible, and the producer and editor was me, Chris Thorpe Tracy, for Lo-Fi Arts. Have a good week.
alwayspossible.co.uk.
Lo-Fi